Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Jew Like Me. My name is Jessica Israel, and this is a podcast for all of us who love Torah, but have felt like we are not fully represented in mainstream Jewish life or the pop culture idea of who a Jew is or what a Jew looks like. We are the children of Abraham, and this podcast is to create our place at the table, let our voices be heard, and celebrate the multiculturalism of Judaism. Let's get into our episode. So I am really excited to make this episode today. I've been wanting and waiting to get to this one, and I'm sure it's going to ruffle a few feathers and probably get some shock and awe, but it's really, to me, not anything that controversial, but I know it will be for some. So we are going to talk about the monopoly on kosher. In my opinion, and just my opinion, again, this is a Jew like me. I'm not the Jew. I don't have the opinion for every Jew or every Jew of color or every karaite or every non-Rabbinical Jew in the world. This is just my opinion. But it's called a Jew like me because I'm sure there are a lot of Jews like me who are feeling the same way. And a lot of times we are either shouted down or made to fear kind of speaking on these things that may go a little bit different or a lot different than the mainstream. So we're going to talk about, like I said, the monopoly on kosher. There is a real big problem, at least in the United States, when it comes to the availability and pricing of kosher food. If you are someone who keeps kosher, typically what that means is that you follow the laws of Torah, where you are not eating, well, put it this way, you are eating only meat that has, that comes from animals that chew cud and have split hooves, that you're only eating fish that has fins and scales, so you're not eating shellfish, things of that nature. We're all familiar with what kosher is in that regard. But here's where it starts to differ. So for me, I follow the karaite ideology, essentially, which is I focus and believe in Torah and Tanakh. I use Torah as my guiding light for the rules that I follow. I feel like all of the laws come from Torah, and then Tanakh as a whole, outside of Torah, gives me more background and information, but I don't feel like it has established anything new, no new holidays, no new rules. I feel like everything is in Torah. That is me. So my position is going to be a little bit different than mainstream Jews or rabbinical Jews who follow halacha, where they are looking at rabbinical interpretations. So for example, when I see do not boil a kid or see the kid in its mother's milk, I'm looking at that literally as do not boil a baby goat in goat's milk, or literally do not boil an animal in the milk of its mother. Essentially that's what it says. And I know that others will say, no, that means you can't eat meat and dairy together. I don't interpret it that way. So I don't have a problem with meat and dairy together. But, obviously I don't believe in killing a mother and its young on the same day because of these different things that are said in Torah specifically. Now, going on to the monopoly on kosher. In this country, like I said, kosher is very expensive. And part of that is because we've made it so that only those affiliated with rabbinical Judaism are allowed to set the standard and are allowed to certify things as kosher. Now, I am very grateful for them, okay? I'm very grateful that we have individuals and organizations overseeing things to make sure that our meat is killed properly, that it is clean meat that we're able to eat. That's awesome for us. But it's a bit of a problem because it is a monopoly. There are what is called the Big Five. They are the largest kosher certification agencies in the U.S., and they control the certification for more than 80% of the kosher food in the U.S. Just these five agencies. It's the OU, the OK, the KOFK, the Star K, and the CRC. And you'll know it when you see the OU. So it's a, U circled by, in a circle, obviously. I'm sure you guys have seen that. Or a K in a circle, or a star with a K in the middle, or this other little symbol that I guess I'll call maybe almost like a backwards E in a way with a K in it. And then the CRC is not as well known. That's the Chicago Rabbinical Council. But these are different agencies that certify kosher food in this country. And like I said, we're grateful because they usually have a rabbi overseeing it to make sure that everything is being done correctly. However, here's where I find the problem with that. Because with rabbinical Judaism, they have made stricter requirements than what Torah actually requires. And that's what we're going to get into, what Torah actually says, and why, again, I said it's a monopoly and it's a bit of a problem. And the price is so high. This all contributes to it because this is economics here. When you have just a small group of people controlling the product. So we're grateful for them overseeing it. I will never stop saying that. We're very grateful. But because the way it's worked, where they essentially have so much power concentrated in these 5 certification agencies, that it's hard for anybody else to come in and say, well, here's my way of, here's what I consider kosher in accordance with Torah, and I want to put these things out. Torah does not say that a Jew has to be the one to slaughter the animal in order for it to be deemed kosher, or it to be fitting or right. It gives all the requirements for the animals to be clean, but it does not say that it has to be a Jew who completes the slaughter. What it does state is that it can't be slaughtered and sacrificed to a foreign deity. So a person can't sacrifice it and pray to a God that's not the God of Abraham, if that makes sense. Cannot do it in a polytheistic worship or anything like that. So that is what Torah actually requires within that. And we can all read this. This is in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and the Numbers has some lines in there as well. So here's where we kind of get to this point that I wanted to make. Is that because with rabbinical Judaism, they require that a rabbi oversee it, and only a Jew does the slaughtering. And remind yourself, a rabbi with regard to who they consider a rabbi who is essentially accepted by them. So an Orthodox rabbi, basically, is what it comes down to. An Orthodox rabbi, for the most part. So this person would have to be overseeing it, which we're grateful for that they do, to make sure everything is going good. And then only a Jew. Now, when we say only a Jew, this means that this has to be a person that they accept as a Jew. So if you were a Jew, but you do not fit within the requirements that this particular organization has, or this particular denomination has for who they believe is a Jew, then you wouldn't be able to slaughter, even if you're slaughtering the animal correctly. And so that really whittles down the amount of people that are going to be able to slaughter. And so that, obviously, if you're thinking economically, that means that, okay, well, the price is going to be high because it's not like anybody can just go and slaughter. But even if they're doing it in the name of our God, I think that's really important. It's important to realize that then, because there's such a small amount of people who could actually do this, it's going to increase the price. We're talking supply and demand, right? And again, only 5 agencies are certifying more than 80% of the food. So even if you have an animal that fits the requirements, such as it chews cud and has split hooves, is a fish with fins and scales, no shellfish, is a bird that is not a bird of prey, for example, like poultry. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a Muslim slaughter it. It doesn't matter if you have a Gentile slaughter it. Even if they're saying the name of our God and doing it in the name of our God, it doesn't matter, according to them. So, like I said, that really whittles down the amount of people you're going to have available. And supply and demand, it's going to make it more expensive just because of that alone. Now, here's the other thing, too, that's really interesting. And this is just a little bit of an aside. One of the things that we know is really big in Torah is not consuming blood. But for some reason, you'll find a lot of rabbinical Jews eating liver. Now, I don't care how much blood you pour out from an animal. Literally, liver is the cleansing organ. It is filled with blood. I don't know how they eat it. That's not for me to judge. But those are also other things that I just don't consume for my own reasons. Another thing too, oxtails. Believe it or not, and especially if you're someone with roots in the Caribbean, I hate to tell you, it actually specifically says in Torah not to have oxtail. I know when I realized that, my heart was broken. My heart was broken. So Torah actually says in Leviticus, I believe it's Leviticus 7, that you shall have no fat of the ox or the sheep or the goat. And as we know who have loved oxtails in our past, the tail is full of fat and then also has the sciatic nerve, I believe. But either way, oxtails is something I no longer eat once realizing that in the text. Also, I mentioned liver earlier. One of the things that I don't eat is liver because not only is liver a cleansing mechanism in the body and it holds a lot of blood, it is full of blood. I mean, I believe that's probably why it's the color that it is. Not only is liver full of blood, liver is something that was used in sacrifices. A pattern that I've personally noticed myself is that the things that were actually used specifically for sacrifices to Hashem, we were told not to eat. Not saying sacrificing the animal, but the parts. So I don't eat organs because of that. As you see, the liver and the kidney and the tails and the fats and things like that were used as offerings. And so just a pattern that I've noticed, it seems like the things that we were told not to eat had to also do with what was offered, and those things being of clean animals, but just those parts of clean animals for us not to have. But everybody's different. Everyone can read for themselves and interpret how they like. That's just a pattern that I had personally noticed. But back to the monopoly on kosher. So you can run into a problem if you have someone who is not considered Jewish by an Orthodox rabbi, because maybe their parents, they don't consider them Jewish because they don't consider their conversion valid, or they don't consider the person Jewish because they only follow a maternal line and this person's father was Jewish, or this person converted, or this person doesn't have a line that they can trace back in a way that satisfies the Orthodox rabbi. There could be an abundance of reasons, but either way, they could be a Jew, but just not be considered Jewish by that sect or that denomination or that particular rabbi, and thus they would not be able to slaughter the animal. Now, here is where I come in with my own differences and what really inspired me to make this episode about the monopoly on kosher. Is because, again, economics means that there's a smaller pool of people who can do it. We already have a small group of companies, these 5 certification agencies that are controlling over 80% of the kosher market, that's already making the price high. So when the price is high, it becomes out of reach for a lot of people who want to eat kosher, because they're not just buying, chicken from Walmart or somewhere else that they see just because it's chicken and it's a clean animal, but they want to make sure that it's been slaughtered properly. And And when you can't find kosher food in many places, Trader Joe's, I've had good luck finding kosher food in Trader Joe's, kosher meats, but you can't find it everywhere. It's really hard. Some places there's a food desert and you can't find it there. So that makes it really tough, because if you've noticed, kosher food can be found primarily in areas where there is a Chabad or a large Jewish community that is accepted by the mainstream. They will have availability to kosher food. And I understand that the idea is, well, that's where the market's going to be, and that's where their focus is going to be, that they want to get it to the people they feel like are going to need it. And again, that'll be a whole different topic of, that's where part of the problem is when we have an issue of invalidating Black Jews or non-rabbinical Jews or Jews of color. But that's a whole different topic that we'll talk about. But it all contributes to this. So you'll only have it in a particular area. The cost will be really high. And then something that I've come across with, I'm sorry, Empire Kosher, I've purchased your chicken so much, and my husband has had to spend over an hour plucking feathers. Unacceptable. Sometimes the food looks like it's literally been beaten up, torn to shreds by a vulture. And you're like, wait a second. If I'm buying kosher food, for me at least, I'm not just expecting that the animal is slaughtered correctly. I'm expecting that the animal has been treated properly as well and respected. That's really important. I feel like that's important in Torah. You are not to abuse an animal. That's why you can't eat an animal that just died on its own. You can't eat a sick animal. You can't eat animals that have these blemishes like that. That's not okay. They have illnesses. You're not supposed to, like I said, abuse or beat up an animal or treat it badly. You're supposed to show respect. And I've purchased, I'm sorry, I'm calling you guys out. I've purchased chicken from Empire Kosher, and it looked like that chicken lived a hard life. And it was very concerning for us, because that's not what we want when we're purchasing kosher products, and especially when we're paying a premium for it. Let's now talk about what the Torah says about how you are to slaughter an animal. And the Torah says, do it as I have commanded you. That's it. The Torah does not actually tell us how to slaughter an animal. And so some of you may hear that and say, no, there's a special way. No, there's not. You will never find that in there. There is no way. It does not tell us how specifically in Torah. We know because of tradition. We know because it's been carried on. We know because it's not just the fact of, Orthodox Jews who slaughter meat a certain way, but if you look at the communities who have been untouched, the communities of Israelites in countries throughout the continent of Africa, who do not belong to mainstream Judaism, but are literally still practicing original Judaism from the first temple, that is not rabbinical, they kill their animals the same way. If you look at Islam, they kill their animals the same way. So it gives you comfort in knowing, okay, this is the way that we must kill our animals. This is the way we must slaughter them. That's where you're getting that from. It's really trust and tradition at that point. And thank goodness for it. Thank goodness that we have communities who have survived so long that we can look at them and say, okay, we trust you. This makes sense. Now, with halal, they kill their animals the exact same way. Exact same way. Halal is the way that Muslims eat. There are some differences in terms of things that, foods that they're allowed to consume. But in terms of slaughter, it is the same thing. In fact, actually, a difference is that with halal slaughter, they will recite the name of God before every individual slaughter. However, with industrialized kosher slaughtering, corporatized kosher slaughtering, they may do a prayer to God once and then they slaughter a whole line of animals. They don't do it for each animal, which is interesting, right? And now someone may say, well, if they're slaughtering in a halal slaughter to Allah, then they're not slaughtering to our God. Yes, they are. Allah is just God in Arabic. And Muslims worship the God of Abraham as the only God. They do not worship anyone else. They do not worship any prophets. They do not worship any wise men. They do not worship any angels, any saints, anything like that. They worship one God and one God only. The same God we worship, the God of Abraham. They kill their animals. They slaughter them for eating the same exact way. The difference with halal is that halal does not require that the person be a Muslim. It only requires that the person do it correctly and do it in the name of Allah, which is the God of Abraham, which is our God, Hashem. Okay? So, interesting, right? Kind of brings us back to the point of, well, Torah doesn't specify that the person has to be a Jew. It doesn't specify that at all. Halal does not say that a person can't be a Jew, a person can't be a Christian, a person can't be anyone else, as long as they slaughter the animal correctly, as specified, and that they do it in the name of the God of Abraham, which in Arabic would be Allah. If you go to an Arabic country and you find a Jew there, if they're not speaking Hebrew and they're speaking Arabic, they're going to call God Allah, because that is the name of God. It is not a different God. It is our God, the one God, the only God. They do not believe in other gods. So it's interesting with that, because for that reason, halal food is actually a lot more affordable than kosher food, because there isn't this tight grip on who can slaughter it that is outside of the bounds of, and we're talking in terms of Torah, obviously, outside of the bounds of Torah, just that they do it correctly and they do it in the name of our God. So you will find more availability of halal food, and you will find it at a lower cost. And in my experience, because because of this, I eat halal meat. I have no problem with halal meat. I don't feel like it goes against Torah at all. I know there's going to be some gasps on that. I know there's going to be some shock and awe. Maybe I can even find, a sound effect to put in here. But that is the truth. And then something I've noticed is that, like I was mentioning before with the kosher chicken. Now, this is not all kosher chicken, but the experience I've had from Empire, because that's one of the biggest companies that produce kosher meat that you could find in the stores. The chicken looks beat up sometimes. You don't really have that problem with halal meat. Halal meat, typically, they really take care of the animals. Even if it's industrialized, they take care of those animals. I mean, there's stuff we can learn and we can do better. It really is. It's stuff we need to think about, take down the bigotry lens and let's look and see what our cousins over there are doing and say, hey, maybe we got to get our stuff together a bit, There's one thing that's a bit different, is that the governance around halal food isn't as tight and strict, which does contribute to the lower price, but then also it means you have to make sure you know where your food is really coming from, because you don't want your animal stunned or things like that. And depending on the country, people may do that, depending on the area and things like that. But that's something that many Muslims are not for. They're like, no, you need to kill the meat the way it was supposed to be. You don't stun them because that's just that. You slaughter the way you're supposed to slaughter, and they're supposed to be alive, and they're supposed to be awake, and everything else. And obviously draining the blood, everything. Like I said, it's the same. This is the point that I was getting to with this entire podcast about the monopoly on kosher. And that we have now changed the definition of what kosher is. We changed the definition of kosher to literally fit only within a rabbinical context and through these certification agencies, which at the end of the day are businesses. Now, from what I just described about halal, sounds a lot like kosher, right? As long as you're obviously getting, animals that are permitted. But what's the difference? What is the difference biblically? We're not talking about Talmud. We're not talking about rabbinical commentary. We're talking about Torah. What is the difference when you're talking about the slaughter, especially if it's of a clean animal for you to eat? I was looking at a discussion on abluethread.com. In the comments, it was interesting because I saw someone actually talk about what I was saying and bringing up the fact of, okay, well, we're saying that, not Sean, but in general, it's accepted in mainstream as a person has to be a Jew to be able to slaughter the animal. And you don't know what's in that person's mind, because they can say, well, I'm a Jew and I'm, slaughtering to Hashem, but who knows where their mind is? They could be an atheist. They could be really, to anybody else they're thinking of. You don't know what's in someone's heart and what's in someone's mind. And they brought up also that it doesn't specify that it has to be a Jew. That it just specifies, okay, this is what you can eat, this is what you can't eat, and how to kill it. And it honestly doesn't even say specifically how to kill it. But we've obviously, through tradition, like I said, and through established customs, we understand how the throat is supposed to be cut. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm going to wrap this one up right now, because hopefully this gives you guys something to think about, something to talk about. I would love for it to start a conversation, because maybe we need to change our idea of what is kosher. And I'm putting this out there because the reality is you can do everything right, everything according to Torah. And let's say you slaughter that meat and it is, you've been trained, whatever the case may be. And it is essentially kosher, but you could be sued if you were to market it as such. You can't go in a store if you have a company or you're a small farmer and say, okay, well, I've made sure this is kosher meat. They're not going to accept it as that. Because of the monopoly on kosher, that's not going to be accepted. So essentially what we've done is now we've allowed companies to control and dictate what is kosher and what is not, rather than Torah. Just something to think about. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. I really appreciate the support. If you would like to get in touch or stay connected, please visit us on our Twitter or Instagram at A Jew Like Me. Also, if you're interested and would like to send a personal donation, because this is a labor of love, my Cash App is Torah Blessed, TorahBlessed. Thank you again so much for the support, guys, and I really look forward to chatting again next time.